Hey, Melissa Lieberman here, independent consultant, business owner coach. And today I want to share with you a common pitfall that I notice consultants or independent consulting business owners falling into that I want to make sure that to help you not fall into this trap is the trap around negotiating your consulting agreements and all of the mental drama that concept brings up. I mean, think about negotiating. When we think about negotiating, we think about things like the common things that come to our mind are things like hostage negotiations or really intense political negotiations, like things that either life or death or feel like there's a no-win situation. And so when we think about the concept of negotiating consulting contracts in our business, one of two things happens. We just completely avoid it because it feels incredibly scary and prone for failure, or we procrastinate and try to avoid it and defer and delay it as best as we can. So from that perspective, I want to share with you today what I see to be the best approach for contract negotiations so that it doesn't become a sticking point in your business development process, so that you don't leave money on the table as you are finalizing proposals and statements of work in your consulting business. So I'm just going to share with you a quick story. That's the best way to describe this to you. A quick story with you about a consulting business owner client that I was recently working with. And he was at the place in his business development process where he had a client who was ready to work with him, and he was just finalizing the proposal, all of the contract terms, so they could turn it into a statement of work. And so he came to me and said, look, can you review this statement of work so that we can, and give me your feedback. And so as I started diving into the proposal, looking at his pricing, looking at the scope, looking at all of the terms and conditions in there, I started asking him a lot of questions about, what was behind this? How did he come up with this pricing, for example? How did he come up with the approach he was recommending, for example? And as we started digging into it even further, he realized that he hadn't really gained all of the details needed in order to price out the work and in order to make sure that he understood what the client valued, why they were doing this, what the benefits were to them, and therefore how to quantify those for himself. And so the trap that he was falling into, that so many independent consulting business owners fall into, and you may be one of them, is the trap of using the statement of work or the proposal as a mechanism to negotiate an agreement. Using the proposal as the mechanism to quote unquote negotiate all of the terms and conditions, negotiate the approach, negotiate the the pricing, and then move forward. That's a trap because it's way too late in the process. And of course, when you think, well, I've got to put this all down on paper and then we'll negotiate, of course, you're going to delay, defer, procrastinate, try to avoid it, because none of us want to negotiate. The only kind of person who wants to negotiate is probably a consultant for negotiation that loves negotiation, right? Most likely you're not one of those. So with that being said, here's what we did for that particular client, and here's what I recommend for you in order to really take the best approach for negotiating in your business development process. So here are the two things. The first is, for this particular client, because he was already down the path of using the proposal as a conversation mechanism to get alignment, then we had to basically use what we had, right? Just take what we had and optimize it. So that's the first thing. If you get yourself into this position where you've already all the way down the path of using the proposal as your mechanism to negotiate, here's what to do. basically get yourself to the place where you haven't put so much pressure on yourself. When you say this word negotiation to yourself, it probably makes you freeze. It probably makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel inadequate, and second guess yourself. You don't want to go into a conversation in that frame of mind, in that emotional state. So what works best is getting yourself to the place of taking the temperature down by not looking at this as a negotiation. And it truly isn't doesn't have to be a negotiation. What it is instead is really looking at, and this is what we did for the client, really looking at this as a mechanism to gain alignment. So this is a conversation, not a negotiation. This is a conversation to gain alignment. When you go into that conversation, think about it from the perspective of asking yourself questions about how can I think about myself in a way that gives me the best, sets me up for success. So for example, I've done this 1,000 times when it doesn't relate to a contract. How can I take that perspective and apply it to this situation? Because this is what you do as a consultant every day, helping people get to an agreement in some form or fashion, right? Are they going to agree to do a task? Are they going to agree to a certain approach? I mean, think about everything you do all day long is about getting agreement and buy-in. And that's all that we're doing here, is applying those same skills. And sometimes as consulting business owners, we kind of panic and think that somehow this contract, quote unquote, negotiation is different. Instead, just think about it from the perspective of, I've already done this in so many different ways. How am I going to approach it in this particular way? So that can be really valuable. The second is really thinking about the other person that you're talking to, your potential clients, and thinking about it from the perspective of they're more than willing to pay you for what it is, the value that you have to deliver. This is something that's really important to them, and giving them the benefit of the doubt rather than going in and thinking that they're trying to, negotiate the best deal for themselves and take advantage of you. So that's the first thing. If you find yourself in this position where, like my client did, where you're at a stage and you're using a proposal as a tool to negotiate, or a tool to gain buy-in, or a tool to gain agreement on scope and timeline and cost, that's the approach that you want to take. Getting yourself into the most effective frame of mind in order to do that, using the techniques I just shared. Now, let's just take a step back though, and really talk about how to avoid getting into that situation in the first place. And that is the best approach to contract negotiations, which is essentially not needing to negotiate when you get to the proposal phase. Treating the proposal phase as a check the box, treating the proposal phase as this is just putting everything we've already agreed to in writing, so that you're really not negotiating at all. What you are doing is moving the process up front and gaining buy-in, gaining mutual agreements on each step of the process as you develop a scope, as you develop an approach, as you develop the pricing and the budget. Co-creating, updating your business development process so that you co-create it all along the way, and there's no need to negotiate whatsoever. That is the best approach to consulting contract negotiations, is essentially setting up your business development process in a way that avoids them entirely. So that is the example. That is hopefully a really story that you can relate to here today. If you find yourself in the position of needing to quote unquote negotiate a proposal, that's those are the tips to do that. And then also the tips for you to update your business development process so that you can avoid it altogether. Be sure to check out next week's episode of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast, where I go into so much more depth around this topic of negotiating, how to avoid negotiating, and when you do find yourself in the position of negotiating, how to set yourself up for success. So stay tuned for that. Go check out that episode, and I will see you again next week. Take care.